The shuttle trembled like a beast in pain as it tore through the ash-thick atmosphere, its outer hull blistering from re-entry heat and kinetic flak. Inside, silence reigned except for breath. Short, sharp, strained. Commander Alara Voss crouched. At the edge of the deployment ramp, armored fingers clenched around the maglock rail. Her eyes, steel gray and unblinking, flicked over the holographic feed as red sigils bled across the screen. Target extraction had gone to hell. Again, they had dropped in for a diplomatic asset, one of the Concord's mediators taken by a war-born splinter cell, but the compound was burning before boots touched soil. Tactical intel had been flawed or fed to them too late, and now charred metal and screaming flesh marked the ground where diplomacy had failed. She gave the silent hand, signaled the squad fanned out. Silent, efficient, human. They were shadows in. A war zone that shouldn't have existed, bypassing collapsed walls, stepping over blood-slick floors, ignoring the garbled voices pleading in half-spoken alien tongues from beneath rubble. Orders were clear. The asset was priority. Nothing else. Smoke stung their throats as the halls narrowed. Heat warped the walls and flickered strange patterns through their visors. She could feel it creeping in the familiar pressure behind the eyes, that buried programming her generation never talked about openly. The one designed to activate when peacekeeping failed. The kind that made humans frightening even to themselves. A shape lunged from the dark. Human. Burned, screaming in a language lost to pain. Reflexes fired before her mind could stop them. Her pulse round shattered the figure's chest. It crumpled. With a sound more human than she could bear, Cade hesitated beside her. His jaw worked beneath his helmet, but he said nothing. The asset was pinned in the lower chamber, alive, bleeding, crying for help in soft Concord standard. Alara hoisted him over her shoulder. A child, practically. Thin, ceremonial robes charred. At the hem, eyes too wide for someone who'd once believed in the promise of peace. The exfil call crackled through. Enemy reinforcements inbound. 4 minutes to airstrike. No time for precision. Only survival. They ran through fire and falling steel, their suits beginning to buckle under radiant heat. A support beam crashed between Alara and her last man. She turned, hand outstretched. His gaze was calm, final. He mouthed something and raised his rifle, covering their retreat with a ferocity only humans could summon in certain death. The shuttle lifted with a roar, dragging through turbulence as the ground vanished beneath a column of light and death. Inside, silence again. The child sobbed. Cade stared at his gloves. Blood alien and human glistened on the fingertips. Alara sat motionless, spine rigid, mouth pressed to a line. Mission successful, the log would read. 1 rescued diplomat. 3 soldiers lost. 200 dead in collateral. Alara didn't correct it. She never did, because this was the price of restraint. And restraint, it seemed, was the first thing to die when humanity entered the fire. The hearing chamber hovered in low orbit, over a dying moon, its translucent walls pulsing faintly with bureaucratic warmth, meant to inspire cooperation. It only made the silence feel heavier. Commander Alara Voss stood alone at the center, unarmored, her posture stiff but unyielding. She was surrounded by forms not quite human, luminescent tendrils, scaled diplomats, and voices that echoed in. Harmonic tritones, the Galactic Concord Council, 13 species, 13 watching pairs of eyes, none of them blinking. The report was read aloud in clinical cadence. Destruction of neutral infrastructure. Unjustifiable force. Collateral death. Count beyond operational protocol. No confirmation of a declared war zone. One voice-dry, tremulous cut through. You were dispatched for diplomacy, Commander. Not demolition. She said nothing. A different envoy leaned forward, its words a rhythmic chirp translated into the common tongue. It is not the first incident. Your species' judgment is reactive, primitive. The word hung there, radioactive. The Concord didn't need proof. They had precedent. Alara's fingers twitched behind her back, invisible. To the Council, 3 lives lost, 200 gone. A child saved. She had made the calculation because no one else would. She didn't defend herself. She didn't have to. Humanity's history defended and damned it already. When the Council adjourned, it was without a verdict. Deliberations would continue. But the real judgment had already arrived. That night, ships drifted farther from the human fleet. Communications became clipped. Alien crews rerouted away from joint operations. Subtle, professional, but unmistakable. Humanity had become the monster under the bed of the stars again. On the observation deck, Cade stood beside her, arms crossed. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The divide between them and the galaxy had widened by miles. News feeds spun their story. Humans, too efficient to trust. Diplomatic leaks circulated terms like genetic escalation, emotional unpredictability, and inhuman adaptability. They called humanity a necessary evil. They called her a liability in uniform. But she remembered the child, the way he clung to her armor through the flames. How he had whispered, "You came." She hadn't answered then, not now. With the stars turning cold outside the viewport, and the weight of silence pressing against her chest, she whispered back to herself, "We always do." Alara Voss ran simulations in her sleep. Not dreams. Simulations. The kind that never ended. Right, always someone left behind. Someone screaming, someone on fire. But she always woke before the end. Never got to change the outcome. Never got to save them all. To her crew, she remained the iron figurehead. Quiet, efficient. Her orders precise. Her tone leveled between razor and ice. Scars trailed down her. Back one from shrapnel, the others from choices. Her mind was a map of failure stitched into experience. She trusted only what she could control, and even that, barely. Duty didn't forgive you. It simply demanded you show up again. She didn't drink, didn't joke, didn't sleep much. But she never flinched. Not in battle, not in questioning, not in the echoing corridors where ghosts liked to follow. Cade Rowan followed her into every fire without hesitation. He was younger, bright-eyed, with the kind of fire that hadn't been extinguished by compromise yet. His voice carried conviction. A born leader who hadn't yet seen what leading cost. Where Alara was steel ground down to a blade, Cade was still alloy in the making, resilient. Yes, but still capable of bending. He had believed the Concords. Promise. Believed diplomacy meant peace. That humans were no longer weapons, but partners. After the extraction mission, cracks had begun to show. His questions had sharpened. His faith wore thinner by the day. But he still stood at her side, hoping she would prove him right. That even war-forged hands could save, not just destroy. Where Cade hoped, Tessa Mung understood. She was the civilian tether aboard the warship Indominus, a xenopsychologist assigned to study interspecies relations. Polished boots, calm voice, eyeglasses that magnified the subtle sadness in her gaze. She never raised her voice, but somehow people still quieted when she spoke. Tessa had seen what violence did to a species' psyche. She'd interviewed survivors from a dozen wars, human and alien alike. She knew the signs: sleeplessness, emotional detachment, the blank space where empathy used to sit. She watched Ilara with clinical concern masked as polite curiosity. She didn't fear humans. She feared what they buried under control. She didn't ask if they were dangerous. She asked when the rest of the galaxy would realize how scared they were of themselves. Admiral Sorek was not scared. Not of humans. not of war. His skin was like glass cooled over magma, shot through with bioluminescent veins that pulsed in time with his breath. His voice crackled like pressure under deep ocean. Of the 12 alien species represented in the Concord, the Valari were the oldest to survive their own extinction. Sorek carried that extinction in his posture, a long shadow of conquest wrapped in icy diplomacy. He didn't speak unless words served purpose. His gaze lingered too long. His tone carried edges like obsidian. He respected efficiency, not compassion. Results, not reasons. When he reviewed Alara's mission report, he made no accusations. Just one statement. This is what I feared your kind would become. He didn't want to expel humanity. He wanted to keep them close, not as allies, as deterrents. And in private moments, when alone with data and silence, he recalculated probabilities. Because if humans ever stopped restraining themselves, no. Civilization would be able to predict the outcome. Only count the ruins after . They called it the silence, because there were no bodies. No distress signals. No debris. No radiation scars or gravitational anomalies. Just void. Entire star systems, once bustling with trade, culture, and sentient life gone. Planets remained in orbit, cities still intact, lights still flickering on the surface. But no movement, no signs of life. Like a museum diorama left behind after the curators vanished, the Concord classified it as a containment anomaly. The reports were buried, discussion suppressed. Publicly, it was a data irregularity. Privately, it was a spreading ghost story. The Tlasha homeworld was the first. Then the Arden relay colonies. Then the outermost Kithari moons. Entire civilizations blinking out without a sound. No war. No disease. No known weapon could do this. Nothing should be able to. And yet, one by one, voices fell quiet across the queue. Stars. Ilara read the files long after the lights dimmed aboard the Indominus. She combed through encrypted dispatches and old transmission logs, watching the same pattern form like bruises on a map. Every silence zone had one thing in common: no survivors. Not even orbital probes returned. Not even drones. Not even Echoes. 2. Most in the Concord, this was a distant puzzle. An unfortunate but isolated mystery. To Ilara, it was a warning. She felt it. In her gut. In the way instincts prickled at the base of her skull when she stared too long at star charts that had grown darker month by month. This wasn't natural. This wasn't war. Cade thought it was sabotage. Someone's hiding it, he said. Jaw clenched. There's power in fear. Tessa, more measured, suggested a psychological phenomenon. Civilizational collapse isn't always violent. Mass despair. Cultural entropy. It happens. Ilara didn't buy either. Not completely. Not with what she'd seen. Because one of the last flagged reports, before the Tlasha vanished, concluded. A single line of corrupted comms. Almost nothing. But barely audible, once cleaned up and decrypted, was a voice. Not Tlasha. Not human. Not anything cataloged. And it didn't speak in threats. It asked questions. What remains when sound dies? How does a mind hold silence? Will you hush your violence before I must? Ilara replayed that fragment again and again. The cadence wasn't artificial. It wasn't a virus. It was curious, dispassionate, observing, like a scientist, peering into a petri dish before deciding whether to cleanse it. The threat wasn't just in the voice. It was in the implication. This wasn't just disappearance. This was deliberate erasure. A force powerful enough to unmake civilizations without. Force, without trace, and still leave the lights on. Politics didn't matter now. Distrust between species wouldn't matter later, because something was already out there, already watching. And it didn't care who started the next war. It only cared who survived long enough to hear the silence coming. It drifted like a carcass. Between stars. At first, it was just a blip anomalous radiation spike in the Koros expanse, where traffic was minimal and anomalies were common. Patrol drones flagged it. Then they vanished. A Concorde scout vessel approached. Silence. It was only when the Indominus diverted course and deployed its own recon team that the shape emerged from the dust. A vessel, but not built-grown. Biomechanical plating spiraled like shell ridges. Around a central hull that pulsed faintly, like breath. Tendrils of metallic sinew hung loose, suspended like nerves severed mid-function. The ship was immense, over 3 kilometers in length. No identifiable drive signatures, no heat readings. But it wasn't dead. It was hibernating. Alara stood inside the shuttle, helmet sealed, breath steady, gaze locked on the thing through reinforced glass. She'd seen wrecks before. Combat debris, burned stations, crushed escape pods. This wasn't damage. This was preservation. This ship had not been destroyed. It had been abandoned or escaped from. The boarding crew entered through a wound-like opening in the hull. It hadn't been cut open. It had peeled as if the ship had molted. Or something inside had. Inside was worse. The walls were ribbed in. Flesh-metal composites, living tissue shot through with organic wiring and twitching nodes. The air was dry but thick, humming low in frequencies their suits barely filtered. Light came from phosphorescent sacs in the ceiling, like bioluminescent tumors. Doors dilated open with a wet squelch, revealing corridors that bent at impossible angles. Dr. Tessa Myung, despite her protective gear, winced as she walked. "It's reacting to us," she said. "Some kind of environmental mimicry or nerve napping. It's alive, or was." Then they found the chamber, spherical, lined with pod-like structures, each large enough to hold a humanoid. Most were empty, dark, and collapsed like burst seed casings. One still glowed faintly. Inside floated something thin, spindled, and utterly inhuman. No limbs in the traditional sense. Instead, tendrils, sensory stalks, a body suspended in pale. Fluid, twitching against restraints that looked grown rather than manufactured. Cade's voice broke over the comms. "Elara, this thing's still alive." It opened an eye, not in greeting, not in recognition, in warning. Then the scream came, not a sound of pressure. A psychic pulse that struck every human on board. Images, flashes, death, silence. A chorus of extinguished voices crying out as they were swallowed by nothingness. An overwhelming, oppressive message. Don't follow. Don't seek. Don't awaken. The crew staggered. Blood dripped from noses. One Marine collapsed, seizing. Another screamed uncontrollably. Tessa dropped to one knee, whispering, "It remembers." What it saw. What did this to it? Elara gave the evacuation order. As they pulled away, the alien ship didn't pursue. It simply began sealing itself shut, folds of bone and fiber knitting over exposed corridors. Lights dimmed. The vessel receded into quiet, waiting. Back aboard the Indominus, decontamination protocols kicked in. The crew was silent. No jokes. No banter. Only a shared, suffocating dread. Because whatever built that ship had erased civilizations, and whatever had hunted that ship was still out there, watching, waiting, deciding who would be next. The creature lay in a containment field deep beneath the Indominus medbay, its body barely tethered to life. Though humanoid in silhouette, the physiology was unmistakably alien: skin the color of oxidized metal, limbs that folded in unnatural directions, and a vocal system that clicked more than it vibrated. It was the lone inhabitant of the pod recovered. From the derelict vessel, a living echo of a dead civilization. Elara stood on the other side of the field, arms crossed, every instinct alert. Tessa, and 2 Concord xenobiologists stood nearby, adjusting translators and synaptic relays. The creature opened its eyes, 4 vertical slits that did not blink, and locked onto Alara with a look not of hostility. But Sorrow. Tessa stepped forward first. "We're trying to understand. Who are you running from?" The creature spoke, not through words, but pulses. The neural translators struggled, forming fragments from fragmented thought. Harvest. Engines. The lights flickered. Machinery. Around the medbay groaned under unseen strain. The creature's mind pressed outward, not to attack, but to project. Tessa clutched her head. The words emerged, distorted and chilling. They do not kill. They unmake, rewrite, consume memory. Soul echo. We fled not to survive, but to forget. Who are they? Alara asked, voice low. The creature trembled. Its body rippled with chemical stress responses. The architects, they seed the silence. They were before form, beyond war. They do not hate. They do not judge. They correct. Correct what? Deviation, emotion, will. The translator struggled, skipped. You burn too brightly. You fracture the rhythm. They will come. Tessa glanced at Alara. They're not just exterminators. They're purifiers, erasers of noise in a cosmic signal. Alara stared at the alien. And humanity? A pause. Too loud. With that final transmission, the being spasmed. A surge of psionic energy lanced through the medbay, frying sensors. It wasn't an attack, it was a failsafe. A final self-erasure. By the time systems reset, the alien's brain activity had ceased. Not dead by trauma. Simply gone. As if even its final thought had been deleted. Alara didn't move. Her breath was shallow. In her mind, the name repeated like a countdown. The architects. Not a species. A reckoning. The official directive came within hours. Cease pursuit. Maintain distance. Submit all findings to Concord Central Command. Cold, bureaucratic language signed by admirals who had never bled in vacuum or stood eye to eye with something ancient enough to remember the birth of stars. Alara stared at the message in her quarters, expression unreadable, fingers curled tightly. Around the edge of the console, the lights overhead cast a sterile white glow across her scarred face. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just pressed her thumb against the override, encrypted the file, and deleted it. She would not obey because something about the creature's final pulse hadn't left her. Not the words, the intent. It hadn't just feared what was coming. It had despaired of it. That kind of fear didn't come from myth or panic. It came from memory. She stepped onto the bridge like a loaded gun. Cade was already there, reading. From a tactical brief, cross-referencing deep scan anomalies along the trajectory of the derelict. When he saw Alara's face, he straightened. Please tell me that look doesn't mean what I think it means. We're going dark, she sighed, voice clipped, all channels encrypted, internal records falsified. We're chasing the source. Whatever killed that ship, whatever made the silence, we're finding it before it finds us. Cade's jaw tightened. You want to violate Concord orders? That's treason. Do you know what that means for the crew? For me? I'm not asking you to agree, Alara said. I'm asking you to trust me. Cade's eyes flared. You think trust means going along with a suicide mission? You've got people on this ship who still believe in the chain of command, who need the structure. If you break it, what's left? Alara turned away. Structure didn't save that derelict. Orders didn't stop the silence. There was a pause, long and heavy. Cade spoke softer now. This isn't like you. You don't know me as well as you think, she replied. The Alara, you know, followed orders straight into a trap. That Alara let people die because she waited for permission. Cade's voice cracked. And if this gets everyone else killed? She met his gaze. Then let it be my name on the tombstone. He didn't answer. Not immediately, but he didn't from its patrol vector, slipping beneath the Concorde surveillance grid and into the shadows between stars. Two truths hung between them, unspoken but unyielding. Alara was done following orders. And Cade's faith was starting to break. The grand convocation chamber aboard Concorde Bastion was a spire of glass and radiant light, orbiting a dying white star. Here, beneath banners of a dozen species, alliances were tested not by fire, but by silence. Admiral Sorik's voice cut through that silence like a blade. Human forces are to remain within their designated sectors, all further independent. Expeditions are suspended, effective immediately. Alara, beamed in Via Hala, didn't flinch. But beneath her calm, she burned. The chamber's atmosphere shifted tense, brittle. The Yizari representative hissed in agreement. The J-Kari folded their 1,000 limbs in ritual disapproval. Even the usually neutral Nasari kept their eyes averted. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer a partner. They were a problem. Sorik stood at the center of it all, robes gleaming, expression unreadable. He was taller than most species, with bone-white skin and eyes like obsidian shards, reflecting nothing, revealing less. His words were precise, his tone clipped. One derelict, one psychic rupture. And already, human command disregards chain of command, disrupts diplomatic protocol, and withholds crucial intelligence. Alara countered, her tone low but defiant. You're not reacting to what we did. You're reacting to what we might become. Sorik tilted his head slightly. A species that evolves too quickly, adapts too violently, burns too brightly. A phrase landed like a strike. He'd heard the survivor's final message. He knew. Tessa, watching from the observation gallery above, felt a chill run through her. The words weren't just repeated. They were weaponized. Sorik wasn't afraid of the silence. He was preparing for the day it turned its gaze on them, and humanity brought it down on all their heads. Across the outer colonies, the repercussions rippled. Human ships were denied port. Joint research projects were suspended. Every intercepted transmission about the derelict became evidence in a growing dossier of suspicion. Skirmishes flared at border checkpoints. An attack on a human relief convoy was dismissed as a misunderstanding. No one apologized. Within hours, Concorde intelligence broadcasts leaked reports of humanity compromising containment, suggesting they had provoked contact with a hostile existential force. Alara read the report in silence aboard the Indominus. No author listed, no verifiable source. But the signature was unmistakable. So R.E.K. He wasn't just responding. He was isolating them. Cade entered the room. As the display faded, "We're being boxed in." Alara nodded slowly. "No, we're being prepared." For what? She turned toward the observation port, where the stars no longer looked like wonders, but eyes. For blame. The official directive came within. Hours. Cease pursuit. Maintain distance. Submit all findings to Concorde Central Command. Cold, bureaucratic language signed by admirals who had never bled in vacuum or stood eye to eye with something ancient enough to remember the birth of stars. Alara stared at the message in her quarters, expression unreadable, fingers curled tightly. Around the edge of the console, the lights overhead cast a sterile white glow across her scarred face. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just pressed her thumb against the override, encrypted the file, and deleted it. She would not obey because something about the creature's final pulse hadn't left her. Not the words, the intent. It hadn't just feared what was coming. It had despair of it. That kind of fear didn't come from myth or panic. It came from memory. She stepped onto the bridge like a loaded gun. Cade was already there, reading. From a tactical brief, cross-referencing deep scan anomalies along the trajectory of the derelict. When he saw Ilara's face, he straightened. Please tell me that look doesn't mean what I think it means. We're going dark, she sighed, voice clipped, all channels encrypted, internal records falsified. We're chasing the source. Whatever killed that ship, whatever made the silence, we're finding it before it finds us. Cade's jaw tightened. You want to violate Concord orders? That's treason. Do you know what that means for the crew? For me? I'm not asking you to agree, Ilara said. I'm asking you to trust me. Cade's eyes flared. You think trust means going along with a suicide mission? You've got people on this ship who still believe in the chain of command, who need the structure. If you break it, what's left? Ilara turned away. Structure didn't save that derelict. Orders didn't stop the silence. There was a pause, long and heavy. Cade spoke softer now. This isn't like you. You don't know me as well as you think, she replied. The Ilara you know followed orders straight into a trap. That Ilara let people die because she waited for permission. Cade's voice cracked. And if this gets everyone else killed? She met his gaze. Then let it be my name on the tombstone. He didn't answer. Not immediately. But he didn't leave either. As the Indominus veered from its patrol vector, slipping beneath the Concorde surveillance grid and into the shadows between stars. Two truths hung between them, unspoken but unyielding. Ilara was done following orders, and Cade's faith was starting to break. It began with silence. Then came the screams. The fleet had answered a distress beacon near the Persine Rift, a region already whispered about in half-coded military briefings and redacted science memos. 3 Concorde ships arrived first. 2 Masari battlecruisers. 1 diplomatic frigate, all equipped with cutting-edge stealth arrays, fusion shielding, and psionic dampeners. All gone in 13 seconds. No explosion. No weapon trail. Just absence. By the time Ilara's encrypted feed caught the incident, the footage had already been fragmented by psychic feedback loops. Static crawled across the screen. Then light. And then the shape. Not a ship. Not a being. Something between. Both drifting just beyond the rift. It twisted geometry like a virus rewiring thought. It shimmered wrong, impossible colors, strobed like a dying sun, translated through grief. Cade tried to process it. There's no identifiable signature. It's not in the database. Tessa's voice shook. It doesn't want to be known. And then the real horror arrived. Another fleet, 11 ships from 6 different species jumped into the region with emergency reinforcement protocols. They spread out in a cautious wedge formation, shields raised, weapons primed. Nothing responded. Nothing. Moved. And then, without warning, every ship in the wedge fired on itself. Lasers carved through their own hulls. Auto turrets turned inward. Crew escape pods launched and then imploded. No external force, no traceable signal. Just a shared, instantaneous suicide pact across 12 command decks. The Masari didn't even scream. The Isari shrieked as they decompressed. The Jikari shredded themselves with their own claws before the hulls ruptured. Ilara watched, stunned. No calls for help. No final words. Just madness. The shipboard eye flickered. Psychic contamination level. Terminal. Cause unknown. Recommended. Action. Flee. Cade broke the silence. They didn't die in battle. They gave up. No, Ilara whispered. They were turned. Tessa staggered, eyes wide, sweat beading down her temple. This wasn't weaponry. It was contact. Their minds made contact with something they weren't built to comprehend. Their species couldn't survive it, couldn't interpret it. Elira's voice was a knife. Then we'll do what they couldn't. What are you saying? We go closer. Cade stared at her. We just watched 12 ships self-destruct. And yet we're still here, she said. We're the only ones who didn't break. That. Silence returned, heavier now. Ilara met his eyes with something feral, something not entirely sane. Tell me you didn't feel it. In the noise, in the void. It spoke, Cade, and we understood enough. Not to die. Behind them, the darkness of the rift deepened, silent, watchful. Waiting. And humanity took another step into it, unflinching. The data crystal recovered from the derelict vessel resisted decryption for hours until it didn't. It yielded suddenly, as though choosing the moment, as if waiting for the right hands to touch it. Human hands. Tessa stood over the console, lips dry, heart thudding against her ribs. It's not a map, she whispered. It's a profile, a biological schematic. Ilara leaned in, eyes scanning lines of alien glyphs, overlaid with genetic code familiar and foreign in equal measure. The sequences glowed faintly, like a memory dredged from deep time. Base pair chains twisted into known configurations, mitochondrial sequences, cortical growth regulators, human. Then the patterns began to fracture, spike intrusions, forked, loci, code woven in fractals far beyond modern biotech comprehension. This isn't natural evolution, Tessa said, voice hollow. It's not even intelligent design. It's manufacture. The screen shifted again, an image emerging. A single word blinked across the projection in a language no one should have known. But everyone understood. Seed class engine. Species designation, human. The breath caught in Ilara's throat. Cade froze behind her. An annotation spiraled outward. From the central genetic map activation vectors, emotional trigger paths, neural layering under extreme stress. Hidden keys embedded in the species-wide genome, waiting dormant, waiting for a signal. Tessa's hands trembled. We're not the result of chance, or even Earth. We were planted. A long-game deployment. A weapon waiting for the right war. Flashpoints. Lit across the display epochs of conflict, each aligning with spikes in human innovation, rage, and growth. From sticks to steel to singularity. The message continued. Containment failed. Emergency protocol active. Await architect signal. Await awakening. A slow dread sank into Ilara like ice down her spine. Not only were humans designed, but their greatest qualities? There. Adaptability, aggression, relentlessness. Were not virtues. They were functions. She thought of every war Earth had waged. Every empire that rose faster than it should have. Every time humanity had faced extinction and fought harder. Not resilience. Programming. Cade finally spoke, voice low. What are the architects? Tessa shook her head. Makers, maybe destroyers, maybe both. But they're not gone. The code. It's pinging, like it's listening, like it's waiting. Outside the ship, space felt colder. Not empty, but occupied. A silence pregnant with intention. The data file began to corrupt itself, folding into recursive encryption beyond recovery. One final phrase blinked before the file died. Ilara stepped back, her voice a whisper. We weren't made to survive. A silence. We were made to answer it. The official seal of the Galactic Concord flickered onto the bridge's holoscreen, a sphere of interwoven stars, surrounded by fractured rings. But it was wrong this time. The seal bled red. A signal of sanction. Admiral Sorik's holographic projection emerged from the light, like a sculpture carved from glass and contempt. His angular features betrayed nothing of his species. Telepathic depth, except, perhaps, their calculated cruelty. Didn't waste time with ceremony. By executive consensus of the Concord core worlds. Article 6 had been invoked. Humanity's actions were deemed irreparably destabilizing, their existence strategically volatile, their potential classified as an uncontained galactic risk. Sorik's voice rang out, cold and final. All human military craft are now designated rogue. Effective immediately, a sector-wide bounty is authorized. Capture optional. Termination preferred. The silence on Alara's bridge curdled into a scream that never left the throat. The broadcast expanded, bouncing across the relay grid, repeating on every known channel in every major tongue. Civilian transports, outposts, allied colonies. The words echoed. Terminus protocol. Species-level quarantine. Active engagement authorized. Tessa stood frozen, a data slate falling from her fingers. Cade's jaw clenched. They're hunting us. The list of betrayal was long. Diplomatic channels cut. Access to Concord Stardocks revoked. All trade with Earth sanctioned. Even the neutral Avari Confederacy had voted to approve the declaration, citing existential uncertainty. Humanity was being cast out not for what they'd done, but for what they might become. And the architects hadn't even returned yet. The decision hadn't come from fear of human aggression alone. It came from the data, the truth buried in the derelict, the design. Humanity was no longer unpredictable. They were predictable, dangerously so. The architects would come. And when they did, humans wouldn't be victims. They would be vessels. Admiral Sorik's final transmission cut deeper than any blade. To Commander Ilara Voss, stand down and surrender your vessel, or be erased, as your creators intended. The signal died. The stars grew quiet. Ilara stared. Into the void, pulse hammering in her ears. It wasn't just betrayal. It was containment. The galaxy didn't want to fight them. It wanted to silence them before they remembered too much or woke up. She turned to her crew. Lock down all channels. Prepare for pursuit and bury our AFF codes. From now on, we don't fly under their sky. Humanity had been declared a threat. Now it would prove what kind. The colony's surface burned like a dying star. Craters stitched the landscape neat, surgical patterns left by orbital lances. Structures once teeming with life now lay in cinders. Foundations warped from the heat, steel bones exposed like snapped ribs. There were no bodies, only the shadows of where people had been, vaporized mid-motion. Parents, children, lovers erased so quickly the soil hadn't cooled yet. Ilara watched from orbit in absolute silence. She had issued no orders. The crew said nothing. In their silence was understanding raw and aching. This colony had been neutral, unarmed, a civilian sanctuary operating under Concord Charter. It had flown the banners, sent the messages, followed every protocol. It hadn't mattered. To be human now was to be target marked. Inside the command module, Ilara sat alone. Lights dimmed. Screens off. Only the faint tremble of the ships. Hull beneath her boots. Then came the pulse in her chest. Fast, hard, wrong. She tried to breathe. The air refused. A memory snapped into her mind like a detonation. Her first command. Her first lost crew. A decompression breach. Fire. Screens through static. Limbs floating. Blood boiling in vacuum. The face of a dying lieutenant clutching. A family photo. His eyes locked on hers, as though forgiveness were possible. The console lights blurred. Her throat closed. Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She folded, one hand pressed to the wall, the other clenched into her ribs, as if she could hold herself together by sheer force. The tears came silently, not as sobs but as tremors. Her body remembered what she wouldn't let her mind feel. It screamed while she stood motionless in its storm. She didn't hear Tessa enter, but she felt her sit, slow and careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal, too proud to show its Pain. She said nothing at first, just sat near. Human warmth in a room filled with ghosts. Then, with piercing softness, she spoke. They targeted civilians because it was easy. Because they want us afraid to belong to each other. Ilara's voice broke like cracked glass. We built that colony. I helped draft the treaty that protected it. Tessa looked at her, eyes dark with something deeper than empathy recognition. You thought that made it safe. Ilara laughed, bitter and low. I thought we'd earned it. The silence stretched. You never stopped carrying them. Tessa said, all of them, every mission, every loss. Even the ones who followed you willingly. You still think their deaths are your burden to wear. Ilara turned, eyes wet with fury. Because if I don't, who the hell else will? Tessa didn't flinch. Someone who hasn't bled as much might call that narcissism. A breath caught. Between rage and heartbreak. But I don't, Tessa continued, voice steady. I call it damage. And it's going to get you and everyone else killed. Ilara stared into the wall. She didn't move. You want vengeance, Tessa said. But that's not the same as survival. You're leading people who still believe in something. If you lose yourself now, we all follow you into the dark. A long silence, then barely audible. I never asked for this, Ilara said, Tessa. Leaned forward. No one does. But you're the one they followed. Not because you're unbreakable, because you're still standing. The colony burned below, and the ghosts gathered. Ilara exhaled slow, ragged and stood one more time. Cud stood by the inner airlock, hands balled into fists, jaw clenched so tight it trembled. The hum of the engines behind him did nothing to mute the pressure building inside. He had waited for the right moment, when the crew was busy, when no one else would hear what he had to say, or watch it tear them both apart. Ilara entered, calm, but hollow-eyed, still wrapped in the shell she wore since the colony fell. He didn't wait. This isn't command anymore, he said. It's a crusade. Her head tilted, slow, calculating, bracing. You told us we were fighting for survival. Cade continued, each word a blow he didn't want to land. But I think you're fighting for revenge. She said nothing. That silence stung more. Then denial. I watched you order a preemptive strike on a relay station. No Concord ships, just comms infrastructure. Civilians. Do you even remember their names? Ilara's expression didn't change, but something in her stance shifted, tightened. Cade's voice cracked. They followed you because they believed in what made us human. But now you're starting to sound like the people who built us to die. Still nothing. He stepped closer. Tell me it's strategy. Tell me you're not unraveling. Finally, her voice came hoarse and low. If we don't show strength, they'll pick us off one by one. That's not strength, Cade snapped. That's fear. And I didn't sign up to become what they accused us of being. The space between them was thinner than air, thicker than history. I'm thinking about leaving, he said. There's a science vessel in the outer belt. Still neutral. Still human. He didn't expect her to beg. Ilara Voss didn't beg. But part of him hoped for something. A reason. A spark of the woman he once followed through fire. She only nodded once, cold and heavy. Then leave. The airlock doors hissed shut behind him, but the silence between them would echo longer. Neither realized it yet, but that fracture had already started to spread, and humanity didn't have enough left to afford the break. The hidden vault was buried beneath layers of corrupted code and dead. Encryption and ossuary of knowledge left sealed for millennia. It had taken the last of Tessa's skill, the ship's quantum cognition core, and several dozen forbidden AI routines to break through the firewalls. The files weren't stored in text or speech. They were engraved directly into biological code neuronal. Patterns, hormonal triggers, sleep cycle memory flushes. When they finally broke through, it wasn't with a click. It was with a scream. A data echo ruptured through the ship's core, flooding every system with cascading fail-safe signals, non-lethal, but cold, calculating. Then, the silence. A stillness that didn't belong. The file designated itself. Project Primogenitor. Tessa's face drained of color as the contents generations of suppressed history, unfolded maps of pre-galactic human settlements, long erased from any chart. Genetic sequences intertwined with dark matter signatures. Psychological models shaped for resilience under galactic scale. Stress. The file told a single story. Humanity had not evolved organically. Not entirely. They were designed, constructed, modified from proto-life forms seeded across hundreds of worlds. A failsafe. A weapon in slumber, built not for dominance, but containment. For them, the architects. Alara stood motionless as the truth reassembled her identity, piece by agonizing piece. Inside the data, her own name appeared not just as a designation, but as a keystone. Alara Voss wasn't chosen by chance. She was a convergence point, a biological vector whose genome aligned perfectly with the command chain embedded in Project Primogenitor's emergency activation sequence. She had been activated the moment the derelict was discovered. Everything she had felt, her sharpened instincts, her unrelenting drive, her moments of impossible clarity during chaos. It hadn't been trauma alone. It had been programming. Dormant no longer. Cade's confrontation echoed inside her like a hollow bell. He had been right. She had changed. But it hadn't been a descent. It had been an awakening. Tessa approached, face ashen, voice shaking. You're not broken. Alara, you're functioning exactly as they meant you to. Alara turned her gaze slowly. What does that make me? Tessa hesitated, then whispered, not a soldier, not a leader. A response. The words hit like gravity tearing through air. Diagrams unfolded on the display harvest networks that stretched between galaxies. Star systems hollowed out like fruit rinds. Lifeless husks orbiting blinking relics called convergence engines. The architects had returned before, and every time a trigger was pulled. A new iteration of humanity was awakened to meet them, but none had survived long enough to tell the next. That was the cycle. Design, deploy, destroy, reset. And now she was the fulcrum of the newest cycle. Her mind had already begun restructuring. Thought patterns, memories she had never experienced surfaced. Battle formations, languages no longer spoken, tactics against entities whose forms made no physical sense. This wasn't evolution. This was recursion. A cold, timeless intelligence had shaped her species to die meaningfully, to burn bright enough to stall the darkness. Alara clenched her fists. Not this time. Again. She would not die in accordance with their programming. She would not be a function. If the architects were returning, she would meet them, but not as a failsafe. As retribution. Behind her, Tessa continued scrolling through the fragments of ancient history humanity's creators had failed to account for one variable: self-awareness. The moment Alara understood what she was made for, she was no longer at and for the first time in their long, repeating history, the weapon had begun to aim itself. The message arrived through quantum entanglement, non-interceptable. Priority Alpha, bearing a sigil known only to Project Primogenitor. It contained one directive: stall the incoming architect advance by any means. The only viable method was laid out in cold, strategic parameters. Option 7. Contingency burn. A civilian outpost. Small, remote. A quiet sanctuary nestled on the edge of the Helian Rift. No military assets. No strategic value except one. The planetary crust carried volatile antimatter filaments. A precise detonation could rupture local space and force the architects to divert around the unstable rift. 3 days. That was all it would buy them. But to execute the contingency, the colony had to be annihilated. 17,000 people. Families, engineers, botanists, children. And Alara had to sign the order. She stood alone in the command sanctum, the authorization panel glowing red in the dim light. Around her, the hologram showed the advancing vector of the architect fleet black geometry, twisting through folded, space-like blades through silk. There was no question about the tactic's effectiveness. The math was irrefutable. The delay could save billions, but 17,000 now, with no warning. No evacuation. Her hand hovered over the confirmation. She could hear their voices in her mind, not the colonists, but her own crew. Cade's anger still echoing, Tessa's quiet judgment, even Sorik's cold, alien disdain. But none of them were here now. None bore this burden. She did, because she was designed to bear it. Alara's chest tightened with the paradox. She had spent her life proving humanity's right to exist, its right to choose. And now, choice itself was a weapon turned inward. The colony had sent a message earlier that day. A simple update. Children painting murals on the landing struts. Crops growing in the hydrodomes. Laughter in the wind. They had no idea they'd become a tactical opportunity. She could abort. She could defy the program. Delay nothing. Save those lives, forfeit millions. But would that be her choice? Or their victory? Her breath shuddered. She pressed her palm to the panel. Authorization accepted. Detonation sequence primed. No recall. The screen dimmed. She stood motionless as the timer began to count down in silence. 6 minutes. The tears came later. When she was alone in her quarters, the lights dimmed. The only sound a low hum of the ship's reactor. She didn't sob. She didn't scream. She just sat and wept without a face to witness it. Outside, in the dark tapestry of the galaxy, a point of light flared, then collapsed into a thunderclap of gravitational rupture. The architects paused. And turned. The mission was buying time, but something else had fractured in that moment. Not her mind, her soul. Kalara Voss had given the order. She had become what humanity feared it would be, what the galaxy believed it always was. But that didn't make her a monster. It made her necessary. And the war was only beginning. The war room was little more than a broken hull patched with desperation and defiance. The flickering projections of the architect fleet formed a looming crescent around the last holdouts of the human vanguard. Fewer than 30 ships remained. Most were crippled. None were built to survive what was coming. But survival wasn't the mission anymore. Alara Voss stood at the center, her presence no longer that of a commander, but of something more elemental. The weight she carried had hollowed her, but it had also forged her. A voice once burdened with doubt, now cut like steel. The world forge must be destroyed. The room fell into silence. No one questioned the objective. The world forge wasn't just a structure. It was the architect's birthing engine, the core of their endless replication. If it was eliminated, the species wouldn't die. But the war would. There would be time. Time to rebuild. To breathe. To live. Alara projected the plan across the scorched table. A relic of war marked by blood and ash. A single strike team. A carrier hollowed of non-essential systems to make room for antimatter cores. Navigation plotted through a slingshot vector, using collapsed stars along the Sagittarius drift. Approach time, 32 hours. Defenses, impossible. Outcome, binary, success or extinction. Cade Rowan was the first to nod. He hadn't spoken to her since the outpost, but his eyes met hers. Now, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not even understanding. Acceptance. Tessa stepped forward next. Her hand trembled, but not from fear. If this is how we save the future, I want to be part of it. They came one by one, engineers, scientists, marines, civilians, with nothing left to lose. Defectors from Concord races who had seen the writing in the void, not a suicide squad. A final act of authorship. They would write humanity's epitaph in architect blood. Elara uploaded her DNA cipher into the core systems. Her lineage, her cursed, engineered blood, would be the key to unlocking the Forge's failsafe. She was. The activation sequence. If the ship reached the Forge, her presence alone could trigger the ignition. A living bomb. She made peace with it as she calibrated the fusion conduits. This wasn't redemption. This was clarity. The architects were not gods. They were remnants, echoes of a long-dead arrogance. And like all tyrants, they believed they could reshape lesser life into tools. That had been their error, because humanity was never a tool. It was a fire, born in pain, sharpened by struggle, and now willingly flung into the darkness, not to survive, but to win. As the carrier powered up, the fleet aligned in a crescent phalanx behind it. A broken blade reforged in defiance. Elara looked one last time at the stars. They had always been beautiful. Even now, she turned her back on them. And walked. Into the war. The void ignited. 1,000 human and defected alien ships surged forward in a formation too ragged to be military and too furious to be accidental. They burned toward the architect world Forge like a tidal wave of defiance. Cannibalized vessels howling with overclocked engines and jury-rigged weapons. The world Forge hung before them, impossibly vast. A black geometric planet ringed with living tendrils of obsidian alloy and unholy machinery. From its orbit bled architect warships, their designs neither angular nor curved, but something maddening in between. As though space bent wrongly around them, they met the vanguard head-on. Space-time screamed. The first clash shattered hundreds of lives in the span of seconds. Kinetic rods, antimatter shells, and focused gravity beams turned the battle into a collapsing cathedral of light and ruin. Ships disappeared mid-broadcast. Distress calls became static. Hulls ruptured like fruit under pressure. But the humans kept coming, because on the ground, or what passed for it, the real mission had begun. Elara and Cade breached the World Forge surface aboard a retrofitted drop capsule, wrapped in stealth skin and sensor ghosts, digging into the pulsating biomechanical floor like a nail into rotting wood. Inside was no less alien. The Forge was alive. Not in metaphor. The walls throbbed, veins pumping bioluminescent fluid through channels that reeked of iron and ozone. Every surface shimmered with unreadable script and moving shadows. It was a god's autopsy slab. Cade moved beside her, pulse rifle glowing with thermal overrides. His armor was cracked, one eye swollen, but he grinned like a man already dead. Always said we'd go out loud. She didn't smile. She had no smiles left. They moved in tandem, slicing through labyrinthine corridors. Architect drones spilled from bone-like creches, insectal nightmares shrieking with subsonic weaponry. Elara's reflexes, augmented by the legacy in her blood, moved before her mind did. Every shot was surgical. Every strike ended something older than history. Cade was less precise, but more violent. Together, they became a spear. Behind them, the fleet waged a war no one expected to survive. A coalition of the broken had become something more, a testament to what fear could never extinguish. Unity, rage, hope. Tessa's voice crackled over their neural links. You're nearing the core. The architect process node is waking up. Something's coming through. They didn't stop. The deeper they went, the more the Forge bled. It resisted them. Doors closed where there were no hinges. The gravity shifted. Rooms turned sideways. Memories from their lives flashed, unbidden visions, dreams, regrets. It was a psychic gauntlet, a last line of defense built not from steel, but from doubt. But they were human, and pain was their language. They pushed through the maze of lies and into the central chamber. It was not what they expected. No reactor, no supercomputer, just a child, or something that looked like one nude, luminescent, and cradled in a sphere of writhing data tendrils. It looked up as they entered, not afraid, curious. The forge was not merely a machine. It was reproducing, creating, a new architect. Ilara's knees buckled not from fear, but a surge in her blood. The resonance, the part of her that wasn't her. It recognized the entity. It called to it. She stepped forward. Cade's hand closed around her wrist. You don't have to do this. I do. No, he growled, eyes wide, voice cracking. You don't. That's what they built you to think. Ilara trembled. The sphere pulsed faster. And then she tore free. And raised her weapon. The chamber erupted into chaos. Above, in orbit, the fleet's final warship rammed into the enemy flagship, taking both into the abyss. Below, within the forge. The final battle had begun not with an explosion, but with a choice. Ilara chose war, because peace had never been offered. The reactor chamber screamed with pressure. Energy arced across the ceiling, like lightning trying to escape a cage. The pulse generator at its center, a churning sphere of gravitational singularity, bound by fractal tendrils, was the final piece of the World Forge's defenses. The forge would live so long as it breathed through that core, and the only way to stop it was from the inside. Cade knew it before she did. He moved faster than her thoughts, faster than her voice, faster than the grief that had only begun to crawl up her throat. He crossed the threshold of radiation and entropy with the same brutal finality that defined every moment of his loyalty. Ilara froze at the door. Her breath caught in her chest. The suit's filters hissed with static. Her voice failed. He smiled back, bloody, defiant, exhausted. He didn't beg for permission. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He chose this. He placed the charges, arms shaking from impact wounds, timers armed. Red digits flashed. 90 seconds. Then 60. Then 30. Ilara watched from behind the containment barrier, fists clenched so tightly her gauntlets groaned. Her legs wouldn't move. Her mind screamed. But the war in her blood, the weapon she'd been made to be, held her still. Obedient to the cost. At 10 seconds, Cade turned to her, eyes bright. Not with regret, but with pride. And then he was gone. This chamber ruptured. Light without color erupted in all directions. The pulse flattened walls, vaporized conduits, shattered the forge's spinal column. The core collapsed inward before disintegrating in a bloom of silent fire. Ilara fell to her knees. The blast didn't touch her, but it tore through everything else. Through the memories, the years, the trust she never had the courage to admit was love. Cade wasn't just her second. He was her balance. The last human thing inside her. And now he was dust. Screamed into her helmet. Not words, not orders. Just the raw sound of something sacred breaking. Her rage had always been fire, but now it was colder, denser, forged into something worse than hate. Purpose. There would be no more hesitation. The architects would die. All of them. Because Cade had given his life for that chance. And Ilara would make sure they paid the price. The core collapsed, but the forge did not die. Elar walked through the aftermath, through twisted metal and burnt air and gravity that bent sideways with every step. Her boots crunched through ash and liquefied alloy, yet there was no heat, just absence. A throne of silence waited for her in the chamber beyond. She thought she'd reached the end, won the war, or at least stopped it. But there, at the heart of the void, they waited. Not a being, a presence, not flesh, a pattern. The architects revealed themselves as fractal echoes in the dark, shapes that broke the mind when looked at too long. Their form danced between dimensions, impossible to track in linear time. But they were there, and they saw her. They spoke without sound, their words pressed against the folds of her mind like the weight of old gravity. They didn't ask questions. They unfolded truths. Humanity was not their enemy. Never had been. They'd built mankind, not as prey, but as equilibrium. Humanity, it turned out, was a compensatory mechanism, the final balance point of all living systems, designed by the architects when entropy grew too fast, when the universe began to unravel too quickly. A correction. Alara wasn't just a commander. She was a counterforce. But it had gone wrong. The silence, the extinction of advanced species, was not a weapon, but a feeding. The architects required entropy, not destruction. The fall of civilizations wasn't cruelty. It was survival. Civilizations rose. They burned energy, created order, birthed chaos. That chaos fed the architects, not in malice, but by cosmic design. Without it, they would fade, so they maintained balance. Reset systems. Called the excess dot, but now entropy was dying. The stars cooled faster than expected. Galaxies drifted into stillness. Even war had become efficient. Too efficient, and so the architects offered Alara a new role. Join them, become the bridge. The emissary. Use her voice, her fire, her pain to ignite chaos where stagnation ruled. Lead civilization into a new age of entropy, not through annihilation, but instigation. Stir conflict. Light stars. Burn empires. Feed the cosmic cycle. They promised her power beyond physics, understanding beyond mortality. She would walk between galaxies as a shepherd of necessity, an architect in flesh, and they offered it without coercion. Just inevitability. The grief inside her twisted. Cade's death. The outpost. The lies of her origin. It all spiraled into a single aching question. Was this always the plan? Was her love for humanity part of the programming? Or had she become something else, something that could choose differently? Alara stood at the edge of their vision, windless and weightless. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a soldier. She felt like a fulcrum. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply turned, her eyes toward the void, toward the last architect's stronghold. And she made her choice. Not for them, not against them, but for something they had forgotten how to believe in. Free will. The silence in her veins was colder now. The architects had withdrawn, not defeated, but waiting, watching, expecting her to weigh the truth against her pain and see their logic as salvation. They had not begged. They didn't need to. They were beyond desperation. But Alara wasn't. She had nothing left to believe in but her own judgment and the ghosts carved into her memory. She climbed through the broken spiral corridor of the World Forge, dragging behind her the one object no species was ever meant to use. A relic of human contingency. An entropy bomb prohibited, even in theoretical design. No propulsion. No heat. No explosion. It didn't destroy. It unwound. Reality. Matter. Space. The thing on her back pulsed like a dying heart, housed in an obsidian shell, humming in anti-harmonics. Even the Forge's corrupted AI systems refused to acknowledge it. Even the architects, in all their knowing, had missed this one thing humanity had buried under layers of ethical panic and impossible math. But Alara hadn't missed it, because Cade hadn't missed it. He'd whispered about it once, half-joking after a failed negotiation. When reason fails, he'd said, maybe we just burn down the laws of physics. Now she understood. This wasn't about balance. This wasn't about survival, This was about choosing the fire yourself before someone lit it for you. She reached the forge's core, the true one, hidden beneath the fake singularity. It was a crystalline lattice of uncollapsed possibilities, quantum scaffolding older than time, the foundation of architect power. If the bomb was triggered here, there would be no elegant decay, no transition to higher planes. There would be only her suit alarmed, oxygen low, pulse critical, spinal trauma severe, but her hands were steady. She connected the sequence. Each press of her fingers felt like betrayal, even now. Not betrayal of the architect's of her own species, of hope, because she knew what this would mean. Without the world forge, the architects would fragment, the network would fail. Some might die, others might lash out, but the chain would be broken. No deals, no cosmic cycles, no destiny. Only freedom and the terrifying cost that came with it. The device locked into place. Countdown, 60 seconds. The walls began to fracture in protest, sensing what was coming. The light bent sideways. Color thinned. Air forgot how to hold itself. She turned to run. Each step was a scream through broken ribs. She didn't notice her blood anymore, just the roar of distortion, chasing her down the collapsing halls like a storm of dying gods. 30 seconds. 20. The gravity tore her upward, sideways, inward. Her suit failed. Her lungs burst blood across. Her visor. Her teeth cracked under pressure. 10. The shuttle bay. They're fractured, half-melted, open to the void. One emergency sled, barely operable. She hurled herself toward it. No grace left, no strategy. 5. She triggered launch. The sled flared against gravity's collapse. 1. The world forge ceased. To be. No light, no flame, no shockwave. Just absence, a sudden subtraction from the universe, as if it had never been written into the cosmic script. The sled spun through null space, alarms shrieking uselessly. Alara lay inside, barely breathing. Her armor was shattered, her heartbeat a flicker. And still, she was smiling. It wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was defiance. Kind of peace born only from the certainty of one's own choice. She hadn't been built to save anyone, but she chose to. The universe could take that from her body, but not from her legacy. Somewhere, out in the silence, something shifted. A pattern broke, and in that fracture, the future began. Galactic concord convened in silence, not the ceremonial kind, not the reverent hush reserved for ancient trials or first contacts. This silence was different, weighted, brittle, stretched thin across the assembly like a taut wire waiting to snap. The humans had returned, or rather she had. Commander Ilara Voss, barely alive, escorted by the last of her crew aboard a crippled vessel that shouldn't have survived the entropy wave. No declaration, no demands, just presence, undeniable. They gave her a seat at the table, but not by invitation. By necessity. No one argued it. Not the Zerelian speaker whose homeworld had been spared by the collapse of the world forge. Not the Krell magistrate whose own fleet had vanished in its path. Not even Admiral Sorik, now stripped of rank, sat silent in a far seat, his angular face carved from shame and calculation. The motion to reinstate humanity passed without opposition. Yet no hands applauded. No gestures of unity followed. Humanity had burned the stars to keep them from falling, and for that they were restored, but also feared. Whispers bled through the diplomatic channels like static. Terms were used without formality. Entropy born, fail-safe species, the unyielding protocol. Other species, some older, some wiser, had begun to reframe human history, not as one of accidental rise, but of terrifying intent. Ilara didn't speak during the session. She didn't need to. She had become myth. Flesh and blood, yes, but her silence now echoed louder than the destruction she had wrought. Her file was sealed in 5 languages. Her medical scans classified. Her eyes different now. Unreadable. The Concord moved forward with humanity as a member once more, but never again as an equal. They were no longer invited. They were tolerated, guarded, acknowledged. The way one acknowledged a weapon too costly to discard. In the shadows of the chamber, envoys adjusted protocols. Alliances bent subtly. Plans made for deeper contingencies. Trust, once difficult, was now impossible. But none dared act, because, for all their fear, for all their suspicion, one truth remained, unspoken yet certain. When the architects came, it was not the enlightened who had answered. It was the broken, the flawed. The ones who chose to fight when all else had fled, and the galaxy would never forget that choice. Ilara Voss disappeared without ceremony, no farewell council, no triumphant broadcast, no honors pinned to her chest. One moment, she was a presence too large for any rune war-etched legend forged. The next, only silence remained. Her quarters aboard the human diplomatic cruiser were found undisturbed, her gear intact, her armor sealed in a transport locker. No sign of struggle, no trace of destination. But she had left a message, encrypted beneath 7 layers of obsolete human code, almost as if she wanted it to be discovered, but only after someone earned it. When they did, it played only once, a single visual feed, grainy, flickering with radiation static. Ilara standing in the airlock, helm off, hair undone, eyes colder than entropy. She spoke only one sentence. We didn't want war. We just didn't run from it. Then she turned. The airlock hissed open. A flash of starlight. And she was gone. Some said she returned to the edges of known space, where the last fragments of architect tech drifted like ash across dark matter tides. Others believed she sought the silence itself, chasing what had come before the architects, what still waited in the void beyond perception. Humanity never confirmed her status, never denied it, either. Monuments were carved anyway. Her face etched into alloy and stone across colonies she'd saved. Her words, those final haunting words, became scripture to some, threat to others, but the truth remained weightless, suspended in exile. Ilara Voss did not vanish because she was defeated. She vanished because legends do not belong among the living. They belong in the silence they leave behind. Tessa Myung stood beneath the ash-hung sky of Solon 9, the colony Ilara had once saved and almost destroyed. The reconstruction had been slow, human, imperfect, not the clean precision of Concord, biofabs or alien nanoforms, but scaffolding built by hand, soil retilled by foot, children playing between ruins where glass still glittered under the sun. She carried no rank now, no badge, just a journal and a voice recorder, archived for some future that might still ask why any of it had happened. Her thoughts carried in quiet dictation, not for history, but for herself. We thought survival would come from strength, from weaponry, from design, but we were wrong. She watched a group of kids chase a drone through broken halls, laughing. Wasn't firepower. It wasn't protocols. It wasn't even Ilara's war. It was endurance. To be broken and still rise. To lose everything and still choose to feel. To stand in the fire and carry someone else out even when no one's watching. She looked down at the cracked badge in her hand. Ilara's found by accident beneath a collapsed control tower. Scorched, bent, but intact. As if it too refused to yield. A small hand tugged at her coat. A child, wide-eyed and silent. She gave the badge over without a word. He turned it in his palm. Studied the name. Didn't recognize it. Not yet. But he would. Because even as galaxies shifted and alliances frayed, some stories never faded. They waited, passed hand to hand, scar to scar, and somewhere in that child's gaze, in that flicker of recognition before language Tessa knew, humanity would survive, not because they were feared, but because no one outlived the ones who refused to disappear.